Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Office of Teaching and Learning in Schools, Office of Special Education presentation on compensatory recovery services for students with disabilities. I want to thank you so very much for joining us this afternoon to learn more about how to make those important determinations regarding students who in fact were impacted as a result of the school closures related to the pandemic. I want to thank you also very much for all that you did each and every day during the past school year, particularly in spring of 2021, when some of our students with more significant cognitive disabilities began to return to school, and also what you did to begin these discussions with parents and families throughout Montgomery County. But I would be remiss if I didn't thank you so much for what you're doing this school years. With our students in-person learning once again, you have many, many demands. And I want to thank you so much for what you're doing each and every day for our students with disabilities and their families. Today, we have planned a presentation that will provide clarifying guidance regarding how to determine compensatory recovery services. Because of the content of this presentation, this is being recorded and will be made available to you. In addition, during segments of this presentation, there will be opportunities for us to answer approximately 3 questions after each distinct segment. However, we know that you will have other questions, and so we're going to ask you to use the Q&A to ask your questions, and I will assure you that we will prepare a response to each and every question to ensure that you fully understand what you're supposed to do regarding this process. I want to remind you that this is a process in which you are going to be supported by central office. Joining me today to assist in this presentation are several of those staff members. In addition to myself, I have Julie Hall, who's the director of the Division of Business, Fiscal, and Information Systems. I also have joining me today, Jonathan Langston. He's a new member in the Office of Special Education. He is the coordinator for compensatory recovery services. I'm also joined by having Brenda Brown with me today. She is the assistant to me as the acting associate. Diana Wiles is also joining us today. She is the resolution and compliance unit supervisor, and Derek Resenberg, who is a tech specialist who works and supports the entire Office of Special Education under Julie Hall. So I want to welcome you to today's presentation. And now let's go to the next slide where I discuss the outcomes for today. Once again, our goal is to ensure we discuss the definition of compensatory recovery services, the legal requirements associated with this, the process for holding meetings and discussions with parents, the utilization of data and how that can help you in making those decisions. You're going to learn about a new data entry tool that will be easy for you to upload information regarding the outcome of your decisions, as well as verifying that discussions have been held. And then finally, we will discuss the coordination of CRS services. So at this time, we are going to transition to the legal outcomes. If we can go to the next slide. And again, this is Diana Wiles, the supervisor for the Resolution and Compliance Unit. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you, Dr. Mason. Good evening. Next slide. What are compensatory recovery services? First, CRS is an equitable remedy. That means that the intention is to make the student whole, to provide them the services that they would have otherwise received if not for the disruptions in education. The COVID-19 closures that caused school systems to transition to virtual learning for an extended period of time has inevitably had a negative academic and social emotional impact on some of our students with disabilities. This is why we must consider CRS. CRS are services that have to be provided outside of the regular school day. Next slide. Is there a legal requirement for CRS? The United States Department of Education has mandated the states who have suffered educational disruptions, consider the impact of closures on students with IEPs. School systems must determine whether CRS is needed upon the return of normal school operations. Next slide. Who determines CRS? This decision to provide CRS services to a student is a team decision. The team is required to collaborate with the parent or guardian, and the determination should be to what extent, if any, CRS are required for each student who suffered educational loss during the COVID-19 closures. The school team is comprised of the case manager, related service providers such as the speech and language pathologist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, a counselor, transition support teacher, the student, if applicable, an administrator or designee. And if you have a challenging case or need support, possibly a central office representative. If the parent and student are represented by counsel, you may need MCPS's attorneys to assist you. Next slide. In what venue can the CRS decision be determined? We've identified two ways that teams can communicate to parents the CRS determination. The first is through a written agreement with Montgomery County Public Schools. In this way, the team should gather information and data on a student and discuss collaboratively with the case manager and the school team members, as well as the parent, in order to make a decision about whether or not the student is eligible for CRS. In this case, a PWN still needs to be completed and placed on Maryland Online IEP. This is a less formal process. However, if a parent requests an IEP meeting, the team should convene an IEP team meeting. This is the second way to convene the CRS decision-making process. In that discussion, you need to ensure that you have all of the team members, including related service providers that have given input to make a decision about whether CRS is appropriate for the student and how much CRS is required. Next slide, please. Factors to consider in the CRS process. Any student who was enrolled in MCPS from pre-K through high school, including students who are or were enrolled in non-public schools and attended MCPS from March 16, 2020 through June 30th, 2021, are eligible to have a CRS meeting to determine eligibility. Case managers should send a copy of the parent guardian CRS letter, which should be signed by your principal, to all parents for whom CRS is being considered. If you have already made a determination in the spring of 2021, you do not need to send this letter home again. If you have the parent and guardian CRS letter needs to go home to every student, even if you don't think the CRS services will be required for a student. For students who have moved in or out of the county, but who were attending during the COVID closures, please contact Mr. Jonathan Langsom's office, and he will help support the school team in either gathering information or getting participation with the other school district. Next slide. At this time, we will take a break and we will answer a few questions.
So Diana, there is no, oh, there's one question. The event that the conversation has had occurred in the spring, the student was found eligible and plans were agreed upon for extended ESY. The student didn't show up. Do we need to restart the conversation? Do we need to re-offer services?
Thank you, Julie. The team does not need to re-offer services, but you can reach out to the parent to find out whether or not the student is able to access those services at your school or through other means. And Jonathan will go through what those means are later on in the presentation. The student is still eligible to receive the services even though they did not access them through the extended ESY over the summer. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Brenda, who's going to talk to you about data analysis to determine whether CRS is warranted.
So good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you for coming. And in this section, we are going to talk about some factors to consider in the CRS process. So here are the key areas that will inform a school-based team to find out whether or not a student is eligible for compensatory recovery services. We are looking for regression or an inability for that student to make progress, the inability to provide services or accommodations during virtual instruction, missing services, a delay in notifying the parents or guardians of a revision or modification to the IEP, or a delay in scheduling a meeting to address the parent or guardian's disagreement with the revisions or modifications to the IEP. It is very important to note that a parent or guardian or a student's unwillingness or to participate in virtual instruction is not a factor in establishing eligibility for compensatory recovery services. As we move to the next slide, these are all of the data points that should be analyzed for all students. In order to determine whether or not compensatory recovery services are warranted, case managers must collaborate with general education teachers, ESOL teachers, if necessary, related service providers, transition support teachers, counselors, school psychologists, if necessary, to take a look at a range of data, including the input from parents or guardians to determine whether or not CRS are warranted in each academic area if the student has that goal on their IEP, social emotional behavior, related services, or transition services such as independent living skills, employment readiness skills, financial literacy skills, or travel training. So I'm just going to go through this list: report card grades, learning skill grades if it's applicable, progress on IEP goals, virtual services logs that were uploaded to MOIEP last year, related service provider logs that are always on MOIEP. If you still have any student work samples, any informal observations that you did as a teacher or a service provider, any anecdotal notes that you may still have, Tier 3 intervention data, any additional evidence of learning data. And one of the things that will be replacing that parent input form is the parent guardian guiding questions. Okay, so these questions are to be asked of the parent guardian during the conversation with the case manager or during the actual IEP team meeting. There are 5 questions. We start out with asking the parent or guardian to identify the child's strengths, areas of needs, and hobbies. Question 2 asks them about whether or not their student demonstrated progress in English language arts or mathematics. Question 3 is social emotional. Question 4 is related to our related service providers. And then question 5 just asks them to provide any additional information or work samples if they're available. It is important to note that if a child only has goals in math, we're only talking about the questions or anything we're doing with respect to math. So you wouldn't ask the questions about reading language arts and etc. Okay. Let's take a look at Appendix C. Appendix C is how you are going to process through the data, because we want to take a look at how a student did pre-COVID closures, during COVID, and after COVID. So it gives you a framework for analyzing those students' data. If we can go back to the presentation and go to the next slide, please. So you will receive, as a follow-up to today's presentation, not only the slides and all of the links and all of the forms, you will get a sheet with all of the links on performance matters, pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, to help you with that data analysis. And I will be going through an example in a few slides. So for our middle school teachers, in grades 6 to 8, we have these evidence of learning literacy data points that we should be looking at. If the student is in an intervention, you should be able to get this information from their intervention teacher. In mathematics, here are the data points from evidence of learning, and here is the math intervention. Let us move on to the next slide, please. For our high school teachers, again, we are looking at progress checks, common writing tasks, and even the ELD ones, the CCR requirements for English and literacy, the intervention data, again, the math progress checks, the CCR requirements, and Math 180 data. We can move on to the next slide, please. For our students pursuing alternate learning outcomes in grades 6 through 12, here are the data that we are asking for you to analyze. There was an ALO data tool that was sent out that took a look at all areas of the student's goals. And then the unique learning systems had specific assessments in reading and writing and mathematics based upon the level of the student. So students who pursue alternate learning outcomes who are identified by their teachers level 1 in literacy, they should be doing the picture match. Levels 2 and 3, the listening comprehension. For writing, level 1 students were doing the errorless writing. Levels 2 and 3, the writing probe. In grades 6 through 12 in math, again, you had the ALO data tool. The level 1 students took the number match in unique learning systems. Level 2, add and subtract. And level 3, multiply and divide. We are going to go on. Our related service providers are occupational therapists, physical therapists, speech language pathologists, and I will include our transition support teachers here. You are looking at your provider logs, any quarterly progress on goals, any consultations with teachers that you had, if you have any current, any student work samples, and any informal observations. The majority of our related service providers, let's go back to the previous slide. The majority of our related service providers, our OTs, PTs, and TSTs, will work with the school-based team and case manager to determine compensatory recovery services in their area of expertise. Our speech language pathologists will be the only related service provider who may act as the case manager because the student only receives speech and language services, or they may act as a part of the team for a student who has a variety of different goals, including speech and language. Now let's move forward to the next slide. Here are some factors to consider for students who receive transition services such as travel training or have IEP goals that are implemented in the community or on-site job opportunities. The TST, in collaboration with the team, will take a look at all of the data. And then there are three options. If the student is able to demonstrate the skills learned virtually upon return to in-person instruction, CRS are not warranted because there is no regression. When a student cannot demonstrate skills learned virtually upon return to in-person instruction, compensatory recovery services are warranted because there is regression or a lack of FAPE. For a graduating senior who had no opportunity to demonstrate the skills learned virtually, when they return, you really want to think about compensatory services. And when we talk about coordination of services, there are options that could be considered in this case. As we go to the next slide, when you receive the Performance Matters data link, you'll be able to click right through and you will get all the students in your particular caseload in your particular school. So I just wanted to walk us through what it might sound like, look like, the thinking and the discussion that you might have. This is a current 10th grade student with a specific learning disability in writing, who also has an expressive language goal about grammatically correct sentences orally. The student does not participate in any interventions. Just to put this all in context, when this student was in 8th grade, the pandemic started in March of 2020. She was in 9th grade throughout the entire pandemic and started as a 10th grader in the fall of this year. So over here, we're going to start taking a look at grades because that's one of the evidence of learning data points. So if you see right here, these marks that she has, this was her marking period 1 English grade when she was in 8th grade, marking period 2, marking period 3, and the end of the year final grade. This is important because this is all pre-pandemic. We saw a little dip here in 2nd quarter, but she was able to really bring her grade up and end the year with a B. When we take a look at her grades during the pandemic, she took Honors English 9A and Honors English 9B. She earned a C at the end of marking period 1, an E at the end of marking period 2, and her final grade in Honors English 9A was a D. Marking period 3, English 9B, she got a C. Marking period 4, a D, and ended up with a C. When she returned back to school in the fall as a 10th grader taking English 10A, one thing that you note, she got a D. So taking a look at her grades pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and over here after pandemic, we can definitely see that her grades significantly decreased. And so that's a piece of data you want to tuck in the back of your head when you're thinking about, is this a student who demonstrated regression? As we move to the next slide, here are her common tasks and progress check data. When she was in the 8th grade in quarter 1, she got 100%. Quarter 2, she got 55%. But remember, that was the quarter when she got a D. But when we went back in quarter 2, again, she pulled it up to an 81%. When we took a look of 2020, an English check when she was in 9th grade in 3rd quarter, a 50%. And then the common writing task was a 75%. And again, it really speaks to that this student did have an impact in her writing and in her English grades in the pandemic as compared to pre-pandemic. Moving on to the next slide. When you're having that discussion with the team, that along with all of the other data points we talked about would lead the team to make a decision. And in reviewing the other data, and as we discussed, this would be an example of a student for whom compensatory recovery services would be warranted because it did impact her in the area of writing, which was her academic goal. School teams will be required to use Appendix B in order to identify a student as requiring compensatory recovery services. And if we can click on the Appendix B, please, and scroll down. So you're familiar with Appendix B from last year, but you'd be using this tool for the students to document the information that you need to determine whether or not a student is eligible. If we could go back to the presentation, please. Thank you. After a review of the data in part 2 of Appendix B, the participants will identify whether or not a student was negatively impacted by the pandemic. This student was. So the team would complete parts 3 and parts 4 of Appendix B to identify the service or services that the student will receive. If the participants agree that there was no impact on the students, they must only complete part 4 of Appendix B. In both cases, the team must document the decision on the prior written notice. I am now going to turn it back over to Dr. Mason, and she is going to discuss how to identify hours of service.
Thank you very much, Brenda. So you have had an opportunity thus far to understand the legal foundations and also how to use data to determine whether or not a student is eligible for compensatory recovery services. But one of the questions that sometimes is perplexing for IEP teams is how many hours should a student really be allocated or awarded to address or to compensate for the loss and the impact on instruction and progress for the student. Now, if you think about the students that you serve, you know that prior to the pandemic, many of them were making progress. But one thing for certain, we know that students with disabilities learn at different rates. Sometimes it could take 4 months for a student to really begin to demonstrate progress toward the attainment of a goal or objective. It could take 5 months, it could take 6 months. And so if I were to think about that as a member of an IEP team, and I've had many, many years of experience making decisions in an IEP meeting regarding the eligibility for compensatory services, I've often looked at the rate in which a student has learned and kind of quantified that in terms of the number of weeks. So let's say if 4 months is an area that you feel, a number that you feel represents what it might take for a student to make some progress, you might recommend an hourly session over a period of 16 weeks. Or you might think an hour might be too long for a student. What about 30-minute sessions? And you would just simply double that in terms of, wanting to have 30 minutes, 16-week sessions or longer. Think about it also in the context of 5 months. And if the student takes that amount of time, that would be 20 weeks. And so it goes, that gives you an idea of how that could go forward in your discussions. As our related service providers consistently use logs, as Brenda spoke about in the previous section, it lets you know that that information will be critically important in making that determination for students. But ultimately, you really want to think about the rate of progress that a student uses and then quantify that by equating it to the number of months that you think it might take, and then ultimately the number of sessions. Now, I will tell you, there will be many parents who believe that compensatory recovery services means minute for minute, hour for hour, second for second, that the student was impacted. And it does not. We don't have to provide services in that way. We don't have to calculate the hours in that way. What we do have to come up with is, though, a reasonable remedy to help to address the deficit or the loss that the student has encountered. If we go to the very next slide, one of the things that I wanted to share with you is some data that was shared before the Board of Education in September. This is the evidence of learning data. And if you're at the middle school level, take a look at grade 8 in the area of literacy. And at the high school level, take a look at grade 11. It's really interesting that for students in our school system with disabilities, based upon the evidence of learning data, they had a slight increase of 0.7. So the loss as an aggregate for students with disabilities at the 8th grade level in literacy is not as great at all. However, we want to keep in mind that because this is at the aggregate level, we want to look at the individual students the way Brenda just displayed by looking at performance matters. If we take a look at grade 11, we see a very slight decrease. But here again, that's at the aggregate level. So we want to make sure that we look at every student individually to ensure that we're making the right decision. But it's interesting to look at how our students performed at this aggregate level in the area of literacy readiness. If we go to the next slide, we'll see the same comparison in the area of mathematics readiness for students with disabilities. And if you'll note, for grade 8, there was definitely a decrease. And that decrease is about 9.3% at the aggregate level. So on an individual basis, you'll probably see a correlation between that as you look at performance matters and your other data resources to help you to make that determination. But it's also interesting to note that at grade 11, there's a little slight uptick. So here again, it gives you some interesting information to look at. But what this does tell you and give you the big picture of what our students currently look like prior to the closure of schools and then the return to in-person learning. So now we're going to move forward with some questions for this section.
Okay, so Brenda and Dr. Mason, one question was, because of the staggered reopening to in-person learning, will the before, during, and post-COVID periods be different for different students?
Brenda, would you like to respond to that question?
Sure. So the data will be there for you to use through the Performance Matters link. Now, some children returned on March the 1st, some children returned on or after March the 16th, and some children returned August the 30th. And so you are going to use the data that you have throughout those periods to determine whether or not the child is eligible.
The next question is, has all the data been gathered for the school teams on each of the students on their caseloads, or will there be data that they have to find themselves?
So in the Performance Matters links that you will receive, depending on the grade level, it is their grades pre-COVID, their grades during COVID, and if there was an interim mark entered, their grade when they came back. Not all, when I pulled these data, not all students had their data when they came back. Okay, but that is something that you can collaborate. If it's not available, that's something with which you can collaborate with your school team. And then if they took the maps, you have map pre, during, post. If they took the progress checks, whether they be the English or the ELD progress checks, that will be there. But keeping in mind, some students may not have every piece of data. For example, if you were out, the student was out during the administration of the spring map of 2021, they may not have that data, but they may have the fall data. Okay, so I hope that helps.
And the final question in this section is, how is the fact that the work gets more difficult as students go up in grade figured in? What if that's the problem, not that there is any negative impact during the pandemic?
Well, I would say that that would be very difficult to tease out, because we know that they're a student with a disability. They did not get the face-to-face instruction. I was in a meeting today where someone calculated that due to our Wednesdays off and so on and so forth, students only got about 80% of the instructional hours that they would have received. And so, yes, we do understand that, you know, the curriculum does go this way and it's still going to go this way, but we still have to recognize that there was an impact there could be an impact from the pandemic, because they didn't get the amount of instruction that they were supposed to get virtually.
We're going to go on now to the very next section, and I'd like to turn that over to Julie Hall.
Thanks, Dr. Mason. So data collection and accountability are common practices in the field of special education, and CRS is no different. We began this data collection process last summer and acknowledge and thank you all who entered this data into the previous Google form. Some staff members were unable to enter that data when the Google form was closed. We're going to address that today as well. Recently, the Maryland State Department of Education issued a memorandum defining specifically the accountability and data requirements. As a result, a more comprehensive data collection tool was necessary to accurately document the data as well as your efforts that you have made for all our students with disabilities. Next slide. So as part of this data collection tool design, the Office of Special Education pulled a data set directly from the Maryland Online IEP. This data set included 19,613 students that were preloaded into our data collection tool. From the previous data, we were able to document 2,476 students who were identified as ineligible or the parents declined CRS. Now we need to move forward to collect the specific data for the remaining students. Although the deadline is June 1st, 2022, we're required to submit quarterly reports to MSCE to demonstrate our progress throughout the year. So everyone will need to use the data tool to enter data for their current caseload. Some of you remember the sheet was closed at the end of the summer. So what do we do with that data? So again, you're entering your own current caseload data. So it's important that you go back into MOIEP, look at those logs, look at the prior written notices to get the information that you might need to enter your information for your current caseload. Yes, this takes time. So similar to last year, staff are going to be paid in 8 additional hours at their per diem rate to do this data entry. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ritzenberg, who helped design this data tool, and we're going to take you step by step through the data tool to demonstrate how you would do that.
Thank you, Julie. We've created this tool for case managers to easily update progress with services. However, if necessary, the tool can be accessed by service providers to enter information for particular services for students. So this is the tool right here. You'll receive a link to a Google form. And in this, this Google Sheet, what you're going to do is the first step is hit Control F, which brings up a search bar at the top right. And I'm going to search my student. As you can see, their names are not here to protect confidential information. So I'm going to put in the student ID number. So for this example, I'm going to go ahead and put in 111. This is my test student. The student ID is over here on the left, their grade to the right. To the right of that is the school and the school contact. This may be the case manager, it could be the service provider. I'm going to go ahead and select the Google form. So if there is information that needs to be entered for the student, you're going to see a hyperlink, a link right here to the Google form for the student. If it says below, or if it says right here, no form needed, then you do not have to enter information for that particular student. So what you're going to do is you're going to select a student, and you'll notice that this form is pre-populated with the student's information. So at the very top, you're just going to verify that this is the correct student ID. The first name of the student and the last name is correct. You have a drop-down menu to select the student's grade and the school that the student is currently located. The school contact, you're going to put in the case manager or the person that is filling out this form. And then for the education program, you're going to select the drop-down program for that as well. And then last, there's a question that asks you, is the student eligible for compensatory recovery services? And you'll select yes, if so. If not, you can put no, or CRS declined by family, or RACU monetary settlement. So for this example, I'm going to select yes at the bottom, and then I'm going to choose next. Okay, here it's asking who is providing compensatory recovery services. So for this example, I'm going to select school-based staff member. And then it lists types of compensatory education recovery services provided, and you can choose more than one. So for example, here I have related services provided by the local school system, as well as assistive technology, okay? And then below is really important because this is where you enter the amount of hours that are planned for the student to receive these services. So at the very top, you'll first see math, okay? So if math is not planned at all, then we'll just go ahead and put NA, all right? However, if your team decides that there are, for example, 20 hours of math provided for the student for services, you may want to put 20 for planned, okay? Now, below that list the total hours of math actually received, that the student received. Okay, so at this point, the case manager or the provider will go ahead and put in the amount of hours that were actually received. So let's say for this example, the student actually received 10 hours of the 20 planned, okay? As we go down, we'll see other examples of services provided. We see total hours of reading planned, of writing planned. So for example, this was not an option in our discussion. We did not provide writing, but let's say behavioral services are planned and there's a number, let's say six hours are planned. If there's a number, a numerical value that is in the planned column, there must be a numerical value below for the received. So for example, if a student is planned to have 6 behavioral services, then there must be at least a number of 0 if they didn't receive any, or a number of 2 if they actually received 2 hours of services. So as I go below, I'm just going to go ahead and fill in their speech language, there's occupational therapy, speech, physical therapy, counseling, we have transition, travel, part of hearing, and then last we have vision. Okay, at the very bottom, this says case managers only. Has the student completed all compensatory recovery services? So at this point, if you verify above the actual planned hours and the hours that were provided to the student, and you think that everything is verified at this point and you want to move forward, you can select yes. If there are additional services to provide, go ahead and select no. And then once you hit submit, there'll be additional fields that you can enter to provide, to enter for additional services. So at this time, I'm going to go ahead and hit submit. You'll notice it says your responses have been recorded. And at this time, all your responses are sent to your email. And I'm going to show you what that looks like here. So your responses are sent and collected together and sent to you in your Gmail, in your mcpsgoogle.net. So you'll see that this has it's kind of like a receipt. It has all your responses that you put in for the student. So here I put in, the grade, the school, I put in the services that were offered, the planned, as well as the received hours. However, let's say that we want to update this, that there were actually, more hours that the student received. And so we want to adjust those hours. So we can actually click on edit our responses, go back into the form, and then let's say for total hours of math planned, if we had planned for 20, now the student actually received 15 or 20 hours. I can go ahead and put that in the field and update this form and then hit submit. Okay, and again, you'll receive your responses, through Gmail. Okay, back to this tool. Again, you'll notice that if there is a Google form next to the student ID, then there is information to fill in. However, if it says no form needed, then you do not have to worry about entering any data at that point. Okay, so just keep in mind that the Google Sheet is a static sheet that once you enter data and information into that Google form, that sheet that lists the student ID, as well as if a form is needed or not, that will not change. That will stay the same, okay? And the second to understand is that when you're entering hours in, if the student is not receiving hours for a particular service, then make sure to write in NA. However, if they are receiving a service, and if there is a numerical value for the planned, make sure that in the field below for received, there is a numerical value for that. Okay, and at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ms. Julie Hall.
Thanks. This slide illustrates important dates to remember as it relates to CRS data collection. So keep in mind there are due dates and deadlines, followed by a blackout period for internal reconciliation and reporting to MSDE. Because more than one person might enter an information on a student, or you might have edited your form several times. So we need to consolidate that information centrally before reporting back to the state. The data is cumulative. So by June 3rd, 2022 deadline, all the data for our special education students must be completely entered. Next slide. As in any new tool, there's bound to be some questions or errors or things that need to be fixed or student information that you think it might be missing. These three gentlemen are in my office, Tyler, Cameron, and Derek, and please email them. This information will be in the slides that will be sent to you following the presentation, and they'll be able to answer your questions and assist you. At this time, we're going to stop and check our Q&A documents, see if there's any questions that we need to address.
Julie, there were two questions that were related to each other. One was, are we supposed to complete the form at the end of the student CRS? And then another participant wrote in, could you confirm that the form is to be completed quarterly in order to provide progress to MSDE? So can you clarify that point?
So it depends on where you are in the process. If you did the decision making and found a student eligible and they received services during the summer and you have all the information, you'd be going into the form one time, entering it all. Some people need to have that discussion now. So they might be entering that information in now and putting in the planned portion, and they don't have the CRS services completed. So they're going to be entering the completion later by editing their form. So it really depends on where we are in the process. The dates are more of a monitoring tool for us. So you can complete them as you get the information throughout this year. It's at these strategic points in time that we will be looking at that data specifically and looking for our own progress as a school system in this enormous task.
The final question in this section was, should we assume students we filled the Google form in for during the spring receive those services?
I would not make that assumption. I would always go back and check. There should be services log, there should be information in the MOIAP, just to be sure, because accountability is imperative. We're responsible for, making sure that what we have determined in those PWNs and have committed to with the parents at that time is actually completed. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Langsa to discuss next steps.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Langsam. I'm a content specialist working out of the Office of Special Education with the main role of coordinating our compensatory recovery services. It's a true pleasure to be here with you all today and to review next steps and service delivery. And my friend Diana Wiles is going to support me in a couple slides here, so I appreciate that as well. If we can go to yeah, you're right in the next slide. Thank you. So now that we've discussed the process for considering eligibility that you've been introduced to the CRS data collection tool for documenting eligibility decisions, services, and the delivery method, we're ready to summarize the steps that need to be followed to complete the process. So to do this, you're going to start by scheduling an IEP meeting or a CRS parent discussion, both are okay, for the students that you've not yet had a CRS eligibility determination. Pardon me. You're going to take the steps that you would typically take to schedule the IEP meeting or discussion with the parent. You're going to use your CRS discussion script linked here to support the initial conversation with the parent. One reason it's important to rely on the discussion script is in part to ensure that we're providing parents opportunity to have this discussion in the context of an IEP meeting, if that is their preference. As you engage in the scheduling process, we want you to determine if there are any cases that may require the presence of a central office staff member so that you can coordinate that support with your special education area or program supervisor. An example of this would be a meeting where you've already received input from that parent and that an attorney or an advocate would be present and that you feel support will be needed. We can go to the next slide, please. So while scheduling your CRS meeting, we want you to be sure to communicate with all your necessary service providers. We want to make sure we're including all the providers and all the folks that support our students in our initial discussions. It's really important to get everybody's input. We also need to consider the need for an interpreter or the use of a language line if necessary. In preparation for the meeting, we want you to collaborate with all your service providers, as I just said, and teachers, and complete your Appendix B for each student being considered. You're going to conduct the meeting using the information documented in Appendix B and the parent guardian input as your guide. Very important that we have that partnership with our families. Make the eligibility determination in collaboration with other service providers and with input from the parent and guardian. We're a team. Complete a prior written notice form using the examples linked in the presentation as a guide. And please make sure that all key elements of the prior written notice are completed. This document is the record of the discussion and will be provided to parents. You're going to upload a completed Appendix B to the student's Maryland online IEP profile. Now I want to ask Diana Wiles to join me and please review elements of a prior written notice document.
Thank you, Jonathan. And if you could click on the prior written notice eligible. So as you all know, prior written notice is your documentation to support the decisions that the team made during the meeting. In this case, this will be during an IEP meeting that is with all of the team members who need to attend, or it's going to be the discussion or conference that you have with the parent after you've obtained all of your data and information from the rest of the team members. So in the first section, purpose of the notice, you will use one of these three statements to indicate the purpose of this prior written notice. Please note that if you're having, and you may have the CRS conversation or discussion during an IEP meeting for annual review or reevaluation, you would just include one of these statements in that prior written notice. It is not necessary to have a separate IEP meeting if you know that the student's annual review or reevaluation is coming up. You can have it all in one meeting. Once you do that, when you prepare your meeting notice, you're going to select other and type and discuss CRS. Again, if you're doing other things during that meeting, you'll also select any of the other purposes for the meeting, whether it's an annual review or reevaluation, review or revise the IEP. Scroll down, please. In a description of the action proposed or refused by the school system, you are going to indicate here, in this case, this is the example or the model PWN for a student who's eligible. So you would put in the number of CRS hours as well as the content areas that the hours will be provided in. Under explanation of why the school system proposes or refuses to take this action, you're documenting the reason why the services that are being recommended for this student and what you base that recommendation on. Grades, work samples, tests and quizzes, informal, formal assessments, and any other information that you and the team used. Below that, you're going to more specifically state how the services are going to be provided. So if a student is awarded 30 hours in total, then you're going to document here whether it is 10 hours for math, 20 hours for reading, whatever the team's decision was would be specified in this area. The next two sections, description of options, other options or reasons the above listed options were rejected. We don't have anything in these two boxes in the model. However, if you do have discussions that were considered prior to or decisions that were rejected, you can document it in those sections. Below their description of evaluation procedures, again, you would just document here all of the data points and documentation that you use to make the decision. And finally, in the other factors relevant to the action proposed, you're going to document if, for example, the parent's advocate, parent's attorney disagreed with the decision, you would document that here. You would also make sure that you put into the prior written notice points of contact for RACU in case the parent would like to file a complaint. The prior written notice, again, this is a model, so you should use your professional judgment on what is appropriate for the circumstances that you're working with the particular students that you have. Jonathan?
Thanks, Diana. I appreciate that. Those examples are super helpful. All right, I want to continue our process down this road of now that we've had discussions and meetings with our families, we're going to document all our decisions and complete our process the way that we need to. So after the CRS meeting or discussion, you're going to need to provide the parents with all of your relevant documentation within 5 days. Those documents are going to include the IEP 5-day verification letter, a copy of the prior written notice that was developed during the meeting, and a copy of the data that was presented on Appendix B. When we're finished with the determination, you're going to use the CRS data collection tool that was shared earlier to document the outcome of the eligibility decision and the services that are being recommended. This is a final step. It's very important. This is how we know that the student is eligible and the determination has been made for that student. This information is going to help communicate the need for central office support and delivery of CRS services. There may be circumstances when you need to refer a parent to our parent guardian, to our resolution and compliant unit for consideration of CRS. Those situations can include a request for reimbursement for a service that a parent paid or a plan to pay a private provider. When there is a request for an additional year of instruction beyond age 21, which we've seen, or when a parent is requesting access to services that are outside of the scope of what our CRS delivery pathways can be, that we will describe a little later in the training. And when all else fails, if you're not sure, give us a call and ask, and we'll collaborate with you and steer you in the correct direction. We can go to the next slide, please. As Julie discussed earlier, the MSDE has established a process for monitoring the progress that all of the local school systems are making with eligibility considerations for CRS and the delivery of those services. This is one of many reasons why it's important that you complete the data collection tool. We're really relying on that. Of course, the primary reason for engaging in this process is to ensure that we are providing an appropriate service for special education students who were negatively impacted by the events of the past school year. It is the expectation that all the CRS eligibility determinations will be completed by March 31st, 2022. And finally, we have a slide here that will share resources. A lot of the documents we've mentioned. We're going to provide the letter, CRS letter in English and Spanish, certainly Appendix B, which we've mentioned, Appendix C, prior written notice, CRS eligible, example, prior written notice, CRS ineligible, example, the parent guardian guiding questions, and then of course, the questions that are being generated in all the trainings, the Q&A will be provided so you can see the questions and the answers that we've been able to formulate. So at this time, we're going to take some questions about the section that was just completed. Do we have any questions that need to be stated?
Sure. So there are two questions, Jonathan, and I'll take the first one. The first question is, does the prior notice have to be uploaded to Maryland Online IEP? So Maryland Online IEP has the prior written notice embedded into the program. You would fill it out on the Maryland Online IEP website. If this is the first time you use Maryland Online, or if you need assistance, then talk to the RITC in your building so that they can give you some support on how to document and locate the prior written notice in Maryland Online IEP. Second question is regarding a spring meeting where CRS was discussed. The participant asked that the team said the student was not eligible, and they were either the student was not eligible, or this team said that the student, they would not make a decision at that time whether or not the student was eligible. But this related service provider thought that the student should have gotten OT services. The question is, will the team meet again on that student?
Wow, that's an excellent question. And I might actually direct it to you, Diana, as there might be some legal ramifications in that if we had a discussion in the spring, how do we reopen that discussion and identify services that maybe should have been identified in the past or that we're thinking about in the future?
Sure. So if the team did not, at the time that the meeting was held in the spring, offer OT services, and you as the related service provider believe that the services are appropriate, you should most certainly discuss with your RITC rescheduling or scheduling another meeting to discuss those services. That does not mean that you have to reopen a discussion on the academic services if decision has already been made and it has been documented. The question appeared that you weren't sure whether or not they had made the decision. So the team probably needs to go back and revisit whether or not they made a decision on academic CRS. But either way, if they did make a decision, you can most certainly talk to your RITC about scheduling another meeting to discuss OT services.
Thank you, Diana. I get to transition back to myself for the next section. So you guys get to enjoy my voice for another half hour or so. Hopefully I'm not putting anybody to sleep. I do want to pause for a second before I get into service coordinations. And I want to acknowledge something that I think a lot of folks are feeling, that this process might feel overwhelming. And we're in a tough spot on our school levels. And I'm getting lots of communication from you. And I want to connect with you for a second. We're here to guide this process and support this process every step of the way. It's a partnership between my office and our schools. You are not going to be alone in this process. We will assist you with each aspect of finding providers, service delivery, and finishing the process. It's my goal that the process is enjoyable as possible and that we provide an amazing service for our families and our students. And I truly feel as we go through this and we finish it, we're going to feel great about what we're doing, and our students are going to make gains around us, and we will see the purpose of this. So I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge and connect with you all. I want to move us forward and talk about service coordination and all the options that are going to be available to us, with more options being developed as we grow and as we move through this process. So MCPS has created multiple pathways to provide CRS services. We have school managed services, where services will be identified and managed by school level staff. CRS by appointment, in which you will be able to request that a student that's been found eligible be matched with a provider. One of the options will be referring a student to the George B. Thomas Saturday School, which we'll hear more about. And another option will be the high dosage tutoring, which we will see happening around us. We can go to the next slide. The first thing I want to talk about is our school managed option. And again, that is when the school team finds a student eligible and we are identifying staff at the school level to deliver those services. We can deliver services pre-K through 12th grade at this level. And we have a lot of options on how we can deliver the services. So we can deliver services before or after school in person when it makes sense. We can use a regional service center that you'll hear more about on weekends. We can access a public space such as a library in the evening or on weekends. And for some of our students, we'll be accessing public spaces for community-based learning. And that will also be on weekends, school breaks, holidays. We're also looking at next summer as an opportunity for this as well. And we should be able to address all the subject areas and needs for our students in one of these options. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about what it would look like if you needed help finding a provider and you need to make a request for central office CRS. When resources are released and we have our information available, you will have a form that you can access that is similar to the data collection form in which we are entering data so that the CRS office can match a student with an eligible provider. We have many providers on our list that can manage many of our students' areas, but we are looking for more, and we'll go into more of that in detail. When you're doing this request, the three main options on that form will be matching with a provider by appointment, accessing the George B. Thomas Saturday School, or even looking to next summer for 2022 delivery. And I want you to feel comfortable talking to your families about the options and really working out what makes sense for the student and the family. Some families might think that a virtual option at the George B. Thomas Saturday School makes the most sense for their situation and their child. Some families might say, you know what, the school year can be overwhelming. We're really busy. We definitely love that we're eligible for the service, but let's look to next summer to see if we can find an option that is better for better timing. So when you fill out the form, you'll choose one of these options and it will generate a process on our end. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So CRS by appointment, you've made the request. You'd like us to match you with a provider from our list. We're excited about it. We had a provider pick up the student, super exciting. And that provider is going to partner with the family. They're going to make contact and they're going to form a partnership. And that partnership can lead in many directions of delivery. We're going to be providing a regional service center that are sprinkled throughout the county. We've regionally located them so that providers can access them maybe a little closer to their home or easier, and as well as our students and our clients. So we have service centers that I will discuss at length in a little bit throughout the county. You also may access a public area such as a library, and we have students that will be matched with a provider that will be providing virtual CRS. So that is an option that is open for discussion. We want to acknowledge here and overall that many of our students are in this situation because the virtual option didn't meet their needs, and we had regression. So those cases might be few, but they will exist. If we can go to the next slide, I want to talk about our regional services centers. I'm really excited about this opportunity. If you remember last year, we had assessment centers. This model is going to be very similar to that model, where we can invite families to meet us at a center and we can provide services. I think it's going to be a fabulous option for all involved. So our service centers are located, like I said, throughout the county. We have Little Bennett Elementary School up in our northern part of the county. We have Rock Terrace School and Julius West Middle School, centrally located here in the Rockville area on each side of Rockville. And we have Eastern Middle School, which is on the other side of University Boulevard, capturing that side of our county. And we are excited that the Rock Terrace School is going to be available to us. We're going to be looking at this site as a comprehensive site where services can be delivered to all of our level students. Some of our students will require a higher level of service, staffing, equipment, accommodations. And we're looking at the Rock Terrace site, the Rock Terrace School, to be able to provide enhanced services or a higher level of services when needed. When we're picking a regional service center and we're within this option, you're going to follow the steps that I'm outlining now. You're going to contact the family first, who you're providing services with. You're going to have a discussion with that family, and you're going to talk about what's convenient and appropriate for the student and the family for accessing services. If we have an agreed upon that let's use a regional service center, that provider will have access to that center's calendar, and they will designate a block of time to block off to be delivered for that service. Some staff members will be entering up to 10 sessions, 20 sessions throughout the year for the calendar. You may do that at that time. So when you're selecting the box, you're going to go in and you're going to put the provider name, the student ID into the chosen slot. You will save it as this event only, so you do not edit all the events of the year. We don't want that, but we are encouraging you to go ahead and mark off the additional dates, Saturdays, Sundays, that you'd like to work with that child until the services can be rendered and complete. If the student requires transportation, we will have a request form that will be allowed to be used to request door-to-door transportation to and from one of our regional service centers. We're very excited. We're working in a good partnership with the transportation folks. They're excited to have this opportunity for their drivers, and we're excited to be able to provide this for our students. To do this, you'll access the form, very similar to the STAR forms that we fill out in general. And you'll fill out that form, and the request form will go directly to the transportation office. We will also get a copy here in the CRS office. Those requests need to be made 10 days in advance, no less, so that we can make sure we have a driver secured, a bus secured, and communication with the family has been able to happen prior to the transportation. The transportation office will contact the family and discuss pickup and drop off times and all that is involved. We're very excited for that option. We might be identifying the George B. Thomas Saturday School for a student or several students. We can service students grades K through 12. It is a virtual option only, and it is set to begin in early November and can run through the whole school year. You can see the date or the times are Saturdays 8:30 to 11. I love the rolling admission option. Students can enter the program and exit it as services are being delivered and rendered. So we're not enrolling a student for the entire year, although we might have students that need to be there the entire year, but we can have students roll in, start at any point, and then roll out when services are finished. It will be an attractive option for some families. The George B. Thomas Saturday School will be limited in some of the services that can be provided. It's mostly only going to be general academics. We are considering or thinking about our homeschool model students, our LAD students, and our Learning Center students as being an appropriate set of students for this model. And as you can see, we can deliver subjects kindergarten through 8th grade, reading, language arts, mathematics, grades 9 through 12, English and mathematics. And most importantly, you will be able to choose a level of math that a student might require so that we can match them with the appropriate provider that can teach that level. I'm excited too. We have a coordinator at the George B. Thomas School that is really going to help focus on our CRS students and help manage it. So when that request is made, the coordinator at the George B. Thomas School will get the family's information. And just like with transportation, the family is going to get reached out to, they're going to get welcomed, the process will be explained, and it will kind of go that way. So I'm excited for that. You heard me mention earlier, summer 2022, CRS. So we're definitely looking to next summer to provide exciting options for our students and families, creative and different types of options for our families and staff. We don't have that structure outlined yet. So before we share it with parents, what the details are going to be, we'd like to have that structure set and in place before we present to our families. But I do want to encourage you to say to families, we will have options next summer. And if that's something they would like to consider, we can certainly go in that direction. And there should be information that we can provide very soon. We can go to the transportation slide. Thank you. So you heard me talk earlier about door-to-door transportation to and from a regional service center. At the secondary level with 10 days notice, similar process, similar request, a school can request an activity bus to provide transportation after school during the school week for CRS. It's not a door-to-door service, but it can get a student from their school back into their community. Many of our secondary students, middle and high school students, it'll be an attractive option for them. Families will be on board with it. And hopefully a student can possibly stay after school, receive their CRS, and have a way to get home. So we're excited for that option as well. We couldn't get door to door during the week. It's just not something that's doable at this time. So the two options are activity bus during the week, door to door to a regional service center. Oh, this is my most exciting slide. Providers sign up to deliver CRS. And I'm sure if I could see all of you and hear you, you'd be chuckling and smiling at me. I love it. If you want to be a CRS provider at the school level, you can be, and you'll have a form to sign up on. These forms are to make sure that you're on the correct payroll cycle and to make sure that we have you in our system and we know that you're providing services. So there's two different forms. There's a form for school level to make sure you're on that correct payroll, and then also to be a CRS by appointment provider where I'm helping match you with a student, and that's a different payroll of 460. We are encouraging folks that are getting very excited to be providers that they can provide services on both levels. So you can provide services to your students during the week and even awesomely meet students maybe at a service center and work with students in that realm as well. We're very excited to welcome all of our providers onto our team. And like I said earlier, this is not you won't be in isolation providing services, no matter if you're school level or if you're part of our CRS team here at Central Office. If you've worked with me, you know that it's my intent to make this a wonderful process, a collaborative process, a team-oriented process. So I hope you'll consider being a provider. It would be wonderful to work with you in that way. So at this time, we can take some questions about our pathways and providers.
Jonathan, this is Brenda. One of the questions that you have received is who can be CRS service providers? If you could share that.
Excellent. Love this question. So special education teachers, I'll just say this, teachers are welcome to be part of our team, special educators and general educators. Paraeducators are welcome to be part of our team. Administrators are welcome to be part of our team. Related service providers are welcome to be part of our team. As you sign up, you will be asked specific questions on your level of experience, interventions that you have certifications in, and just some overall general knowledge. It would be our intent to match a provider appropriately with a student, but we welcome all educators as part of our team.
The last question that I see, I think would be appropriate for Dr. Mason to weigh in on. The question is, if we have families that we made determinations for last year and the family agreed no services were warranted, but now they, quote, changed their mind. When they hear other families are getting services, conversations are back open now, etc. What do we do? Are we obligated to reopen discussions, or can we stand by our spring determinations? I realize that wasn't in this section specifically, but I thought it was an important conversation to have.
Thank you so very much. Can you hear me, everyone?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so I believe very firmly that when parents were given the opportunity to participate in compensatory recovery services discussions in the spring of 2021, and a decision was made based upon the utilization of data and information, we continue to stand by that decision. Now, parents always have the right to request a meeting at any time to discuss their child's progress. And so if the family wishes to convene an IEP meeting for really just discussing how their child is doing currently this school year, that does not change the decision that was made in the spring of 2021. So I want to be clear again that your decision that was made in the spring is a final decision, but we are always open to any parent who wants to request an IEP meeting to review or discuss their child's current progress. And that outcome of that meeting might include adjusting a goal and objective. It might include discussing the need for an intervention or some other supports and services, but it does not change the decision made in 2021. That's my response.
Thank you. Are there any other questions we want to take at this time?
No, there are no other questions, but it's just a reminder to all participants that any question that was not answered, we will be following up in writing with a Q&A document, and we'll address all of the questions that were posed tonight in writing.
But what I would love to say to all of you tonight is to thank you so very much as our audience for being a part of this presentation. We hope that we've conveyed information that will support you in this work. But do know this, that if we go to the next slide, the individuals who are listed will serve as the contacts for you if you have any questions. Phil Lynch could not be with us tonight, but he is our director of the Department of Special Ed Services and will be more than happy to assist. You've met Julie Hall this evening, Diana Wiles, and Jonathan Langson. And although I am the acting associate, I have always had an open door for all of my teachers, related service providers at any time. If you have questions or need clarification, we want to be a support to you. So I want to thank you so very much for your time this evening. As a matter of fact, I hope that you have a wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you for your participation. Good night.